Welcome to That's an Issue. And recently on Living L'Chaim, we did an episode with Penny Tab, a survivor of abuse. And in this episode, we are going to be dealing with Ray of Hope, a wonderful organization that started when a survivor reached out to a friend. And what started after that is a wonderful group of professionals who are there to help victims and survivors and people of abuse in every sense of the word. This episode may be triggering for some. It is also conversations that are heavy, and it's particularly probably not for the younger audience. We speak to two members of Ray of Hope. You're going to hear an introduction about who they are, and you're also in this episode going to hear about Relief, the wonderful organization that people can call when they're trying to find out the right match for them in the professional world. Here is the Kleshik's conversation with Ray of Hope.
Mental health, relationships, those are loaded topics and something that affects every part of our lives. But we aren't having enough open conversations about it.
And that's an issue.
Welcome to That's Issue Podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. If you could start with just tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and then we'll get into why you're here.
Sure. Hi, Shoshana Friedman. I'm a clinical psychologist. I practice in Clifton, New Jersey, and I've been running groups for Ray of Hope for about 2 years now.
My name is Kohn. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I live and practice, have a full-time private practice in New City, Rockland County area. And I am the chief clinical officer for Ray of Hope. I've been involved in Ray of Hope for about the past year and a half.
Okay, so now tell us what Ray of Hope is.
So Ray of Hope is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting Jewish sexual abuse survivors and their families, in a nutshell.
Okay. And you're running groups for Ray of Hope. So is that the main thing that Ray of Hope is doing? Support groups?
That's pretty much how the organization started off, with groups. But really, since David's joined the team, it has expanded and is offering a lot of other services to the survivor community.
Okay.
Now, first of all, thank you so much for joining the show. This is a very intense topic, and it's a real pleasure to have you guys join and share with our viewers and listeners this very serious and intense, meaningful conversation. So I just wanted to thank you for joining and choosing us to have this conversation with. That means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
All right, so let's just jump right in.
Could we start with talking about sexual abuse in the frum community? Like, how widespread is that? What exactly are we talking about? Maybe we should start with that. What do we mean by sexual abuse? Like, what does that cover? What kinds of things?
Go ahead. Let's start with you.
Okay, so I mean, broadly speaking, sexual abuse would be typically seen as some kind of unwanted sexual touch. Really more globally, we look at it as really exposure to any sexual content would be included, and really includes quite a bit of content. Sorry. I think when we talk about numbers and prevalence in the frum community, the research seems to indicate that the rates in the frum community are pretty similar to those in the general population. There are some studies that seem to show differently. Honestly, I'm not sure that a focus on the prevalence is as important as just an understanding that it really is fairly widespread, and there are many, many people in our communities that are really suffering from it and in need of support.
Got it. And what type of support? Before we get to the support, but what can you give like a sequence of events as what would happen, and then what would trigger a need for support, right? So can you give us a typical fact pattern of what you see on a day-to-day?
Is there a typical fact pattern?
So at Ray of Hope, we're really supporting survivors of sexual abuse within the total spectrum of experiences that people can have. So a significant percentage of members of Ray of Hope have experienced what's known as childhood sexual abuse. which means that the experiences that they had occurred during their childhood, either one or a couple of discrete events, or for many, many people, it was a series of experiences that was over a span of time. And then we also have people that have experienced sexual abuse or sexual assault in adulthood, in the context of relationships or marriage or not. So really the spectrum of whatever we are generally saying when we say sexual abuse or sexual assault, people are coming to Ray of Hope for support, and we're looking to support them, all of them.
Got it.
Is there a difference in terms of the support or the help that's needed for someone that it was a one-time assault, let's say, versus someone that it was over a period of time? Maybe it could be years, maybe someone they knew versus someone they didn't know. Is there a difference in what your response would be to that person?
I don't know that there would be a difference in our response. I think in terms of what we see, really there's no good way to predict what the outcome is going to be. There are definitely some risk factors that make it more likely that a person's going to be suffering more significantly. But we do have, women who've been abused for over extended periods of time by either familial members or really unknown strangers, and the outcome can be very similar or very, very different. Some are fine, really, and some present as fine until some kind of triggering life event, and then, then we're getting the calls right before a wedding or right after a wedding or right after a baby or,
Can I ask you a question? Because, we use the word assault and abuse. Can we define that? I'm obviously in the context, there's legality such as, what's criminal, what's not, right? But there's also, different cultures will have a certain religious, if someone doesn't touch before they get married and then someone high fives them, that could be an assault to them, right? In some other culture that's totally not normal. Right. Or and you could stretch that over different fact patterns. So when you say the word abuse or assault, can we get a definition as to what that means? So we're not just broad, and anyone can be, if they say the word, it's almost like a buzzword. But I would rather if we could be more particular and say this is what we could determine what is assault and what is abuse.
So I'd like to make a couple of points around this. As Shoshana said before, abuse would be defined, as any unwanted touch or touch that's happening through a person of a differential in power or authority. So one of the significant factors for children is that they're not of an age to represent themselves with any way, with us relying on them that they can represent themselves. They don't have the authority and the agency. So when there's a significant discrepancy in age, and somebody's engaging with them in touch that's sexual in nature, we don't presume that there's consent. And I don't even mean on a legal level. I just mean, personally, on a factual, personal level. So we call that abuse. Assault is typically going to be, if we're distinguishing between childhood behaviors versus adult behaviors, so then it's also going to be unwanted touch in the context of an adult relationship, or if God forbid it's a stranger in the case of rape, or somebody in public transportation, touching somebody in a way that they didn't ask for or invite. So essentially any kind of touch that doesn't involve explicit consent or involve a person who has the capacity to give consent that's going to be sexual abuse or sexual assault. But we're not, at Ray of Hope, we're not providing treatment. So what we're not doing is looking through the lens of a legal lens or even a clinical lens in terms of, does this qualify as abuse or assault? What enables us to qualify somebody as being essentially a member of Ray of Hope is if they reach out to us and they say that their life has been directly impacted by an experience of sexual or experiences of sexual abuse or assault, or they're a family member, like a spouse of somebody that's had such experiences. And then we're here to look to support them. So when they share their story, when we get to know them a little bit, we're not listening for whether they qualify through their experiences. They qualify through the impact that those experiences have had on them, which is an important point because trauma in general is not determined solely or even mostly by the experiences that happened. It's determined by the impact that it has on the person, which is why it's really complex, because you can have two people that have gone through what seems to be very similar or almost identical experiences, and they're not necessarily impacted in the exact same way. Or as was mentioned before, somebody may have immediate symptoms and a negative impact from what they went through. Somebody else may seemingly be okay, and years later something emerges for them at some other stage in life, or something that triggers them at some point. So we're not looking at the facts on the ground in order to determine if somebody has been through these experiences and if they need our help. It's how it's impacted them, and that's an important point.
Very, very, very important.
Yeah.
And you said that folks who call there's the treatment or the groups is a form of treatment. Can you describe what that is and how that works if someone feels that they were impacted in this way?
So I think, Shoshana, you'll be able to speak to this as well, just in terms of directly facilitating groups with members. But two of the most common denominators among people that have been through these experiences are going to be a sense of shame, a sense of isolation, a sense of aloneness in their experience. And Ray of Hope's existence is specifically to counter that, and to send a message to people that they don't have to be alone, and that they can experience identification and support and connection with others, and that they can have a voice, and that they need to be seen and heard and validated and understood and respected and cared for. So in that sense, what we say is that Ray of Hope is deeply, the groups and all the support that we provide is deeply therapeutic, but it isn't therapy. So we're not formally providing treatment. The groups are facilitated by clinicians, but we're not providing therapy. So almost all members of Ray of Hope are in their own or have been in their own therapy, independently or externally from Ray of Hope. And they're coming to Ray of Hope really for that support, for that sense of community and connection.
Would you like to comment on the...
Sure. Well, I think the experience of just being a part of Ray of Hope in itself, one of our members actually commented this week in group, just saying that her acceptance into Ray of Hope to her was kind of a validation of her whole experience. For many years, she's kind of heard from family members saying, okay, we get it, but time to move on. You're being a little dramatic at this point. And her acceptance in this group to her felt like she has a community. She really did go through something very real and has really impacted her. And participation in group has really given her a community of support that's allowed her to sort through her experiences. It's not all about what happened, as David was saying, really. It's a lot about what's happening in the now, how it's impacting the individual members in their current lives, the way that it's showing up, shame, guilt, responsibility, anger, religiosity. There are lots of different themes that show up throughout the group.
Right. So that was my next question. If we could talk a little bit about the impact and what that looks like. I know we've said already that we can't really predict what it's going to be, but I think you just threw out a bunch of sort of common factors that you see. Could we go through any of them in a little more detail?
Sure.
I think some of the most heartbreaking things that we hear are how people can wind up feeling as adults, even if it's experiences that happened years earlier, so intrinsically broken, defective, less than, dirty. That's a word that people will use, as if they're permanently stained and as if they're responsible for the experiences that happened. And they may even intellectually be able to know that that's not necessarily true, and then it could still feel in a deep sense within themselves, which is essentially what shame is. It's a sense not of I've done something wrong, but I just am wrong. There's something inherently flawed in my worthability and my lovability. I'm just not worthful like the next person is. So to me, that's one of the most essentially heartbreaking and from my experience, people can be in therapy and in good therapy and still struggle with this even after they've done some significant healing. But being able to sit with other survivors and being able to share their experience and have shared identification and support can be healing around things like that in a way that I think potentially no no therapist can touch and impact in that same way. So that's something I would definitely highlight off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think within group itself, it's not just, I mean, it's an intense topic, but we have a good time in group. There's a lot of laughter, a lot of shared experiences, just kind of both heavy topics are addressed and also the day-to-day challenges. And when we're addressing some of these things, a lot of the themes that David is referencing really do play out in a little bit of a different way in the group setting. And we have opportunities to help the group members work through them a little bit differently. So when we're talking about, let's say, the theme of responsibility, like I should have done something differently, or I should have stopped it, or I shouldn't have gone back, or any of those very common themes that we hear from survivors. Within the group, it tends to play itself out. As a recent example also, there was we were sitting around the group talking about something, and I actually completely misunderstood something one of the members said. I guess I didn't have my coffee before. And just listening to the member, I responded something that was really completely inappropriate in the context of what she said. And, she went right to apologizing, I didn't explain it well and all that. And it was incredible to see the way that the group as a whole called me out on it, held me accountable, and helped her kind of reframe, like, that wasn't you, that was her. So just noticing the way that she tends to take responsibility immediately for things that really are entirely not her fault. That became kind of the topic of group, and it became a really healing experience for the group as a whole to sort through. So those are, I guess, something that you can't play out in an individual treatment in the same way, but really is very powerful in the group.
Wow. Let me ask you a question. This is a very sensitive topic. And why as a clinician, and both of you are clinicians, why does this particular area of mental health take a very intense role when it comes to shame, right? We've had people come on our podcast talking about their personal stories. You guys are running groups and effectively helping people that are going through similar or like type of circumstances. What as a clinician, what about this particular area evokes such a tremendous amount of shame that you are describing?
I think in general, before we even get to talking about the context of the Jewish community and the specific culture and norms within that aspect, in general, one's sexuality is from among the deepest, most essential parts of ourselves, and we can't divorce ourselves from that. Like there's a fundamental sense of identity that arises from how we feel and how we develop ourselves sexually. When that gets impacted in a way that is not normative, and the person who's going through it knows that this is not normative. How do they know? They know because it's a secret. They know because they can't share this publicly. They know because other people don't talk about sex or sexual abuse in a way that conveys that there's comfortability and fluency to be able to discuss this. So it essentially sends a message, even if it wasn't explicitly said, that what you went through is abnormal, and therefore how you've been impacted makes you abnormal. And that doesn't actually have to be said to someone, but it's almost inevitable for that to be the experience, especially the younger someone has been, how they're going to internalize that within themselves. Then if you layer on that the context of people growing up within the Jewish community, within the Frum community, and we have particular sensitivity to these topics and how they're addressed, and the discomfort that is often there, even among loving and well-intended parents. These are not topics that are necessarily being discussed in an open way. I think that the community in general is just beginning to sort of emerge and sort of gel together, and like we got to develop fluency in this, because we're appreciating more and more how fundamentally essential this is for our children to grow up in a healthy way. So I think it's almost inevitable that people are going to get impacted in the deepest part of their sense of self.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And I think when kids are, I guess psychologically, when a child is exposed to something that feels so unsafe, the world starts to feel unsafe and chaotic. And very often a child will internalize that experience. And instead of living their life with the assumption that the world is an unsafe place, they kind of take responsibility for it. And it's them who's bad and wrong and doing this terrible thing. And again, within the Frum community specifically, there's often this dual experience where they're living sometimes this dual life where they're doing something dirty, terrible, disgusting, at night sometimes, and then they're going about their day trying to pretend or to be or to continue with their from lifestyle. And it's really just a deeply shaming experience. If anyone really truly knew me, really truly knew what I was doing or what was happening, you would see me as the disgusting, dirty, whatever labels they tend to use for themselves, person that I am seeing myself as. So undoing that requires a lot.
Right.
I would also add that for somebody who's gone through an experience like this and they don't feel safe enough, I don't necessarily mean in the physical sense of safe, but emotionally, psychologically, relationally safe enough to go to a loved one, to go to a mom and dad and share what just happened. Or even worse, people that have gone to mom and dad and shared, and it hasn't been, the reaction wasn't supportive and understanding and caring. Instead, it was reactive or blaming or suppressing and avoiding. So then that only adds a whole nother layer of reinforcing that internalization that we're discussing. So I think that's also important because then you have a traumatization on top of the original traumatization that's happening for somebody.
Right. So you were taking my next question, which is that I know that you're dealing really with adults, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. But since we're just talking about how a lot of the abuse happened as a child, so is there something you would say to parents, you sort of answered it already, that signs they could look for or maybe how to respond if they disclose, which is great if they do, like already, like that step is a good step. Sort of how do they react? So one, I guess twofold. One, how do we make it more likely for the kid to disclose? We've spoken about this on a few other podcasts. So we're being a little redundant, but let's see for someone who didn't listen to a different one, if you could talk a little bit about that. And then two, once they disclose, like what would be the proper way to respond?
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see how you jump in on this one, Shoshana. But I would just give a plug for the idea that as a parent, our first and foremost priority shouldn't be how do I get my kid to disclose. It's how do I get my kid to feel safe and loved and cared for unconditionally. That means whether my kid does or doesn't share, how much they share, how much of the story I get. Now, understandably, this is potentially a parent's worst nightmare come true, and it could be really difficult to stay grounded in that moment. But it's essential. It's essential to make the child and their own sense of being loved and safe the center, and not the story of what happened to the child as the center. So I would just start with that.
Yeah, I would very much agree. I think the relationship with the parents is obviously a critical starting place. With the initial disclosure, we do tell parents often, it makes sense that there's a lot of overwhelm coming up. Ideally, you want to be really focused on showing up for your child, letting them know that you're going to be there for them, that you're going to support them through it. Like David said, not getting caught up in the details of the story, what did happen, what didn't happen, and all that. That's really not important. It's much more about helping them understand that you are not judging them, but that you're not holding them responsible, and that you're going to help them through this. I think in the longer run is actually sometimes that's the more difficult support, because parents might be able to be there at that, at the beginning stage. And then, the kid's in therapy for a few years, or the adult's in therapy for a few years. And now we've spent thousands of dollars and lots of hours. And really, it's time for you to get better now.
Why didn't you get over it? You know? Why are we still stuck on this? These are things that people can really struggle to wrap their heads around in terms of not really understanding a trauma and how challenging this can be. As if somebody who's struggling with this doesn't want to get over it, they would do anything that they can, but it can be challenging for family members to understand and be supportive of this.
So can you walk me through what a meeting looks like? Because and how maybe it is similar or different than a classic AA meeting, or it's its progeny. There's Al-Anon and other type of groups settings. So what like if someone would attend the meeting, can you just walk through that person right now, what that would look like, who would open, how would it start? What about the meeting helps people go through their story?
Sure. I think every clinician runs their group a little bit differently, and we have a bunch of groups running at this point. So I'm sure any of the other clinicians can speak to their experience. Typically, our groups are run with, we start off with kind of a check-in. On occasion, we've sent a trigger question beforehand, something interesting to think about, sometimes something a little humorous.
What would the question be like?
It could be something like just share a story of a minor boundary violation that came up in your life. So we're talking about boundaries in this group. So they're kind of coming in, sharing typically more light boundary violations, and then that kind of helps the group get to how to assert yourself in a setting where you're feeling uncomfortable, talking about boundaries, those kinds of things. So sometimes we start with a trigger question. Other time it's really just a check-in. We spend, I would say, we're supposed to spend about 15, 20 minutes or so just checking in with all the group members. Sometimes the check-ins tend to take longer because there's something that is going on for a particular member or for, in the world that's really affecting everyone. So we do that first, and then we kind of get to the meat and potatoes of the group, where we're focusing on something either based on a topic that the group members have shared that they wanted to talk about. There's usually a little psychoeducation, mostly a lot of shared experiencing, talking through, supporting the members through whatever it is that they're experiencing, talking about. We have a closure exercise of some sort. So in different groups, we run it differently. Sometimes they really like the mindfulness or grounding. Other groups found that too hokey and weird. So then we kind of go with a softer closure kind of container so that our members are really focusing on what they're bringing into their week in a more positive way.
Are there sponsors? Is there a sponsor element to this where someone could be having a rough time and the next meeting is in a week away, or who knows, 2 weeks away, and they could call, like as a sponsor is an AA term, but
so these groups are held every other week in the formal groups where the clinician is serving as facilitator. And in between most of these groups, if not maybe all of the groups, have their own chats that they've developed where they're in touch with each other and they develop connections. We also organize several times a year for the group members to be able to get together outside of the formal groups for socializing, connecting, having a fun activity. And that's something that we help them organize. And then they can also do that on their own. We are a young organization, but one of the projects that is in the works is our volunteer aspect. We are people who have been through their own experiences and are at a point where they have experience that they want to be able to support and be there for another. We'll have that opportunity. So like, for example, a peer support. What I think you're describing that's most similar to the sponsor idea is that when somebody's coming into the organization and they're feeling that they need more one-on-one support, just somebody else to talk to, somebody to share the story with, somebody to be able to reach out to outside of group, there'll be another member that has offered their time and willingness to be partnered with them.
Very nice.
So that's something we're very much in the works.
Nice. Let me ask you a question that might seem like counterintuitive, but do you ever think that, is there a possibility that an argument could be made that talking about something or harping on it too much is part of the problem as opposed to the solution? I know that this seems like the opposite of what we're saying, but it's always good to, even if this is a wrong theory, to debunk it. There are, right, if you're afraid of flying, which I am not, the way to break that is to just do it, right? Or just not to think about it, not to contemplate about how, something might happen. It's just to either, there are therapies and how to break that through. Do you think that, is there an argument to be made at all that coming back and talking about a story that happened X amount of years ago is more hurtful than helpful?
Go ahead. You want to start?
I mean, to me, absolutely. I think it's a great argument. I think it's a valid argument, honestly. The focus of our group is more present oriented. It's not about repeatedly going back to the story and reviewing, the abuse in detail. Although that does occasionally come up where there's something relevant that gets triggered, and we do talk about it in group. The group is a very positive place to be for the most part. If someone is getting really stuck, then we're shifting a bit to accommodate and help them move forward. But really, it's not therapeutic for the group as a whole to really be sitting in the past, as you're saying. I don't know if I would call it sitting in the past and kind of getting stuck in it, but there have been groups in the past, of course not Ray of Hope groups, but other groups that I've been involved with in different ways, where at times the tone can be a more negative tone. So it's really important within the group setting to ensure that the focus of the group is on helping support in being a successful, functional mother, woman, or really whatever role, wife, whatever role that particular individual is in. And that's really what we're seeing happening.
I think also the beauty of the format of the organization is that it's not the story and it's not the abuse and it's not the trauma that's at the front and center. It's the people themselves. So people come in and they're at different stages in their life and they're at different stages in their healing path and in their healing journey. Some groups will start off and there's a lot of time spent on people sharing what they went through and how it impacted them. Other groups start off and that's not the general feeling or desire from the members. So each group takes on its own sort of personality and rhythm, and really it's a reflection of the people that are in it. And the facilitator is there to support their process, hear what their needs are. But nobody is invested in being stuck. When people are stuck, it's because they're not yet hearing themselves. They're not feeling heard and seen by others. And to the extent that that happens, they become more unstuck. Nobody's invested in being stuck. So really, that's what it's about. It's about enabling a community of support for people to feel seen and heard and to matter, and therefore their experiences matter. But like Shoshana said, it isn't about the story. It's about themselves. That's really what it's about.
Your groups, they're all for women? Are you hoping to expand that?
So Ray of Hope actually was founded by a woman, very special woman. Her name is Psy.D. Brody. And she started the organization. She was approached by a friend who pointed out that like there aren't support groups like this. And she said, well, why not? Let's make it happen. And she went ahead and started it, reached out to some people that she knew and started the first group. And it really organically took off from there, which is exactly how wonderful ideas take off and grow from there. And then over time, they become defined and formalized, which is when I got involved in the organization about 1.5 years ago. That was part of what I got brought in, is to really enable the organization to grow and become bigger. So it started off with groups exclusively for women, for female survivors. We now have male survivor groups as well, and both in person and forming online as well, for people that are not wherever the group is locally, that they can't make it. And we also now have groups for spouses of survivors, for husbands whose wives are survivors. And God willing, in the future, we'll have groups for women who are wives of husbands who are survivors. So we're here to support people directly who have been impacted directly and indirectly in these experiences.
We'll be right back to this week's episode. And it's such an important part coming up. But first, let me tell you about Relief. Relief essentially is a free hotline or a free email or a free just contact that I'm not even sure if you could fax them, but you could basically reach out to them and say, hey, I'm going through this challenge in my life. I mean, this whole episode is about abuse. Unfortunately, if you have gone through abuse or you're not sure and you're like, I need to talk this over with someone, Relief is there. They have incredible professionals dealing with people that have gone through abuse and they feel like a victim and they don't necessarily know how to move on. And Relief is there. You could give them a call at 718-431-9501, or you can send them an email, info@reliefhelp.org. Again, Relief is a free service. They're incredible. They are a network of professionals and psychologists and psychiatrists and all the professionals that you need in your life to get you through maybe a very hard or difficult time. Obviously, they deal with everything. It's not just abuse, but they're a great resource, and we have had so many people email us. Thank you for letting me know about Relief. And if you need their help, they are just a phone call away. 718-431-9501, or you can go to reliefhelp.org. Now back to this week's episode with Ray of Hope.
I ask you a question about the groups. When it comes to the community, are these groups as a result of the community not doing something? Meaning the community, let's say the Frum or Jewish community or any community, would say, this is not something we can handle, and therefore these groups have evolved? Or is this the best way to do it? Maybe as a community, it wouldn't matter if if people got up and had a certain, in shul or in an event that everyone was speaking about this. It's better to have create these groups as a localized, private places of security. Meaning, is it a reflection of a lack of help, or is this the best mode? Meaning, would you rather have none of this and move it all into the mainstream, or would you rather it this way?
I don't know that this is the ideal, in the sense that, to me, having a community involved in the process to some extent really does create some kind of environment that allows the survivors specifically to know that there is support, that it exists, that people are aware that they matter. I'm not sure practically what that would look like for Ray of Hope to partner with various communities, but at this point, it does seem that within the communities, they are accepted and they are working closely with particular neighborhoods.
Where do you guys run out of? What particular neighbors are you referring to?
So we have groups.
We have groups in Muncie where members are coming from the Muncie area and surrounding areas like Monroe. We have groups in Brooklyn. We have groups in Lakewood. And we have groups online. We have groups forming in Florida and soon Israel as well.
Chicago.
We have members in the online group, but not yet. Well, our goal is everywhere there's a Jewish community, there should be groups in person and obviously continued groups online for people that are not able to make it in person. But I also want to go back to that question for a second. I've heard many members express, or clients also express to me, there are organizations for people that go through cancer, and supporting them and supporting their families. Why isn't there something for us? I've heard more than one person voice, I wish I had cancer. Everybody would know then that this is valid and this is real, and they wouldn't see it as something that's like pathology. It's just part of life, is that people have cancer. And so we support them and we support their families. And how can it be mainstream, as Shoshana was saying? Like, what realistically does that mean? I think the goal is that Ray of Hope grows, and that people know that it exists, and people support its mission, and people have a place to go to for support. I think that this should be, ideally, each community that has a group would be supporting the groups that are in that community, in the same way that communities support their local chapters of organizations that are dealing with people that are struggling financially and struggling with families, dealing with illness.
And right now that doesn't exist. You feel
where it does exist a little bit. We do have some communities that are supporting particular groups. It's a model, obviously, where we pay our facilitators. We pay them professional rates to support, to facilitate the groups. We don't believe that relying on people to just out of their goodness of their heart to volunteer is a reliable, sustainable model. People will volunteer. Our facilitators are awesome, but it isn't sustainable. They need to be able to be recognized for their time. So there's a significant budget, even though we're a young organization. The money has to come from somewhere, So ideally, each community would be supporting its.
Yeah, it would be.
I love that.
That would be awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. So it would be, the community would say, this is identify
this is
the
what
problem.
We do. This is how we look out for people in our community whose lives have been impacted by this. This is the little bit that we can do to show that we care, and that, you're not less than, and you're loved, and you're relevant.
Got it.
Are there other things that people in the community could do? I'm not sure how to word it. I mean, to be supportive, right? So just beyond, let's say, donating, which is great. Is there anything that a survivor has told you, like, I wish people would do this, or I wish people would say this?
I think the primary wishes expressed are often within the family. The community as a whole, absolutely. There is a wish for the stigma to be removed, for it not to be, there's an assumption of the way that it's going to impact shidduchim or, any other parts of their lives. So this is not something anyone has done, or should not be a reflection in any negative way. If anything, I think some of the women that I've worked with are incredible and strong and have worked through things, and really are models of what a healthy individual can be. So yes, it would be wonderful if the community viewed this differently, and the more we talk about it and the more we understand that our neighbors and our friends and our family members may have gone through something very similar. It's not that, random other person out there. It's us. So on a community level, I think that's the important piece. On a family level, to me, the more painful part that's often encountered is just the lack of support from within the family. I think in the Frum community specifically, there are so many stories of family responses, times when they've tried to disclose. Often, survivors will talk about some kind of like soft disclosure that they made at some point, and the family is just not able to hear it. They, it's not that they don't care; it's that they kind of turn off their cognitive processing somehow, and really just don't take it in, or they take it in and respond in painful ways, or they're struggling. I think one of the most painful things that I see, unfortunately, often in the Frum community is when we have siblings. So there's a lot of, within both the group and my practice, there's a significant number of older brothers, younger sister, and now you have a parent who's trying to support their children, both of their children, trying to find a way to help the survivor feel that they're going to protect them at all costs on the one hand, but then you have another child who himself may have experienced some kind of abuse, or is struggling with mental health issues, or is just really lacked awareness, and it was more exploration for him, but he's kind of impacted his sister's life in this horrific way. Now what? Now what do we do about family simchas? Now what do we do about WhatsApp chats? What do we do about Shabbos meals when she's not comfortable being around him? So
what do you do?
I wish I had the answer to that one.
And these dynamics are incredibly complex, and there are a significant number of parents out there that struggle with these things and need support. Need support. So there is no one. There is no one solution. I think each situation and each family is different. I think that the most important piece, though, is that survivors are not needing a particular solution. They're needing to feel like their experience is relevant and matters, and that fear or shame is not taking precedent over them. That's the most important piece. And that's hard. It's hard for people to deal with dynamics.
But how do you deal with a family that is, like you said, they can't go to a wedding at the same time as their sibling? Like, someone who is a survivor is going to feel abandoned if the parents go to that wedding or that event and they don't take into the account that this person is alleging that someone in the family hurt them. Just by going to that event is an admission that they're wrong, or to some level they can't commit to that side of the story. So how do you deal with something like that? I'm sure that comes up if you're dealing with familial issues. I'm sure that has to come up all the time. Like on a practical level, day to day. How do I go out to lunch with the family? Any move a parent does is going to trigger one of these, has to make a judgment call at the line of scrimmage. What is the call?
I don't think there is an answer. I do think there are many rabbanim and mental health professionals that families consult with who really are knowledgeable and can help guide the parents through these decisions. But they're painful decisions, every one of them. And each of those experiences, there are so many coming to mind of different instances where a parent is put in that position and trying to make the right choice for their family. And sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they get it very, very wrong.
And what would be a very, very wrong?
Well,
I think it's defined more by how the person feels unsupported or uncared for than whatever the particulars are of it. The getting it wrong is if the result is that somebody feels unloved and unsupported.
Would you say the same thing?
I think so. I would say even more, though, there are some objectively very wrong responses.
Such as?
I would say sometimes it's interesting because sometimes the abuser in the family, typically the older son that abused the younger daughter, he might be someone who is, right, or brother, or the other way. It could have been an older sister. It does happen too. Often they are a model child, giving their family lots of nachas. Shocking for the parents to hear that this is the child that has done this, and they're looking at the survivor, who might be struggling in many different ways, maybe has been giving them a really hard time and having difficulty believing, supporting, maybe even knowing what's right. I've worked with families where it's a therapist who's dealing with her children, and objectively, we all know what to do, but when it comes down to family, it really all bets are off. Everything gets messy and complicated. So the right answer, I can't tell you what it is each time. Theoretically, prioritizing the needs of the survivor is typically the advice given. So if she's not comfortable going to a simcha with the brother who has abused her, then we have to negotiate how to handle that situation. But is that what's done every time, or even what the guidance should be every time? Not necessarily.
Are there any hard no's that can't be done? Like parents, or family members. I'm assuming that, when it comes to abuse, and that I remember when I was in the district attorney's office, that the vast majority of unwanted sexual assault and touching is from known people. It's not from random strain. When there was a case, it was crazy. Some random person did something in a subway or on a bus. It was it made the news. Right. So generally it's in a familial setting where you have these stories. So what are the hard no's? Okay, this you can't do. If you're a parent, a sibling, if you're in, a story, what are the absolute no's? That's a definite no-go.
Any come to mind?
I mean, to me, the most obvious no is that if the survivor is saying, no, I'm not comfortable, I don't feel safe with this, we can't override them. We can't override them.
Forcing them to be in the same room or something.
You have to come to the wedding anyway, in for the sake of the family, or for the sake of reputation, for the sake of image, for the sake of togetherness, whatever the motive may be, that is probably well-intended.
That's a hard no.
But that's a hard no. Somebody is saying that they're not safe, and to override them is, like we said before, potentially another re-victimization on top of whatever they've already been going through. I think that it's hard for me to identify too many more. It really is, I think, very case specific.
So what have you seen then in your practice or in your experience that you would say, okay, I've seen 1,000 people. These are easy hard no's.
Look, I also do a lot of marital therapy in my practice. And I think that oftentimes when family, couples, or parents in conflict with children, older children, will come in and there's one or a particular few calcified conflicts, these are the disagreements that they can spend 500 sessions arguing about. They've already spent 500 hours at home arguing about. They're red herrings most of the time. Those are what are representing the fundamental problems in the relationship themselves. And if I can help them go away from the stuckness of the issue itself and attend to the dynamics of the relationship, that's probably where things are, where it's symptomatic, as the problem in the relationship is symptomatic, is what's the word, manifesting, right? It's showing up in these disagreements that are sort of intractable, but really they're fundamental relational issues. The child is not feeling seen or validated by the parent. Okay, well, if that's fundamentally how the child is feeling, then that's going to play itself out in some way. But that's fundamentally where the issue is, where the dynamic is. So from a clinical lens, that's what I'd be looking for. I'd be looking not to only stay with them on the presenting situation, but really take a look at the fundamental dynamics that are at play in the family and see what needs to be tended to.
Interesting. Do you have any, for the viewers or listeners, if anyone is in a situation like this, what are some of the absolute no-goes?
It's interesting because I've had several cases where the abuser actually passed away. And even just in the last year or so, I think I can think of 3 or 4 cases. So maybe another no-go, which is probably not relevant to most, is don't force them to speak at the levaya of their abuser. I think one of the more recent cases with a sibling, well, this happened several years ago, but just now she's working through it, is someone whose sibling passed away on Yom Kippur. So it's an interesting time of year to pass away. And I think there's some Gemara somewhere about just it being an omen of the person who's a tzaddik or whatever it is. So the religious trauma piece that kind of played out as a result, and then the trauma of the family who really used it against her to kind of prove to her that this really was a very good person and all that. So there are lots of different, very specific examples, I guess, that come to mind. There are a lot of don't do's, honestly.
If I could end off with like something a little more positive, that Shoshana, that you like sort of alluded to before when you were saying how some of the members you consider to be like models of like what a healthy person looks like. Could you talk to us a little bit about, I guess, the path of someone would take to get to that? Like, what does that mean? What do you mean by that statement?
I don't think there is one path, but I certainly do think that there are many survivors who, go on to live very functional, wonderful, happy lives. Some women that I've worked with who've been through really horrific types of abuse. I mean, we've been focusing more on familial abuse. Oftentimes that's more of a, older brother, possibly more exploratory, not necessarily a serial offender, which is a different kind of abuse. But women on both ends of it, really, I've watched just the process of really them beginning to admit to themselves what they've been through, beginning to acknowledge the terrible shaming messages that they've been carrying, the horrible guilt, shame, responsibility, powerlessness, all of that. And it's happened at various stages. Some of them are disclosing as children and really beginning that process early on. Some of them are, many of them are disclosing closer to, I guess, shidduchim age, when they start to get nervous about the possibility of intimacy, physical, emotional. So that's really when the process is starting for them. Some of them really once they're in a relationship and it gets activated. So these women at any stage, as long as they have the right kind of support, the right kind of therapeutic support, they really do have a phenomenal chance of getting to the other side, as they call it, in a great way. I can't even think of one story because there are so many stories. You were going to ask for one story?
No, it's not. I was actually going to ask, I know Tara said like lend off, but we did discuss a lot of, close family, but I want to discuss a little about how abuse that you've seen in your either your groups or as a clinician when it comes to a spouse, like,
that's a good point.
What would be determined as, I mean, I know, we've discussed this before on what, but can we like talk about what that actually looks like on the ground? So a spouse says like, I'm not interested tonight. Another spouse says, doesn't matter. What does it look like? What is the actual facts on the ground?
We'll start with that. That's a good example.
That's
an actual example. Unfortunately, that can happen. It can be a woman being pressured to go to the mikvah before it's time for her to. There's a term marital rape for a reason. Being married doesn't give us a green light to be with our spouse. It's consensual, it's relational. So intimidation, pressure, the type of sexual and intimate acts that are happening, if they're not within the comfort zone of both people, then that's also going to be problematic. So any of those examples are potentially abusive behaviors within the context of marriage. I would just say that I as a clinician, I don't believe that there's such a thing as a relationship where there's sexual abuse and there aren't other abuses that are happening in the relationship as well. So there's emotional abuse that's happening in some way, shape, or form. There's many other forms of abuse. They may or may not be happening, but if abusive behavior is happening in the bedroom, it's not limited to in the bedroom. And there are wonderful organizations within the Jewish community that are devoted to supporting and identifying and educating and bringing awareness about domestic abuse. But we do support members of Ray of Hope will come to us who are or have experienced sexual violence or sexual abuse within the context of a relationship or marriage. Yeah, it does happen.
I think David's speaking to one type of abuse within the context of a marriage. There's often, I've worked with many couples really at later stages who will describe, often it's the woman who's kind of coming forward, and they're describing a pattern of what might be called marital rape, but really it's on the part of a non-abuser. It's on the part of a husband who is given poor suggestions about how to go about it. He was told to power through even if she's, really uncomfortable. She learned that she needs to just suffer through it.
We could be more specific about what that, like, I know it's intense, but it's better to like have an idea for the listeners as to what we're talking about than to be more vague.
I guess the profile I was hearing from David is more about an abusive personality, an individual who is intentionally forcing his wife. Whereas within the Frum community, sometimes just a lack of education causes men coming into marriage to misunderstand how to go about it. So they're not necessarily waiting for consent. They're told messages like she's going to be really uncomfortable or unhappy in the beginning. That could happen. And you just need to kind of push through it and keep going. And that can kind of continue for years. There are women who are traumatized by those experiences of feeling like they didn't have a voice to say no, or was their mitzvah or responsibility to keep going, even though they were miserable and uncomfortable. So it's not the traditional abuse scenario that you're describing, but it is one that then has quite a bit of trauma associated with it and needs recovery.
And that those people come to groups that Ray of Hope.
Well, I see them more typically as couples in my practice. Within group, it's interesting. I don't have any of those particular presentations in my group at the moment.
We do have some members that have such experiences. They may also have had earlier sexual abuse experiences earlier in their life as well.
And that plays a role in challenging.
No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that factually they may be in Ray of Hope and identify, what happened earlier in their life, and also this as being sexually abusive and traumatic experiences for them. I would also just speak to the scenario that Shoshana is mentioning. I still stand by the idea that there's some emotional abuse dynamics that are happening. That may not be, like Shoshana said, that may not be the abusive personality, but if somebody's behaving that way, and they're behaving that way because they were told by their Rebbe or someone advised them to, there's some serious flaw in their own judgment that isn't just limited to the bedroom. It's a relational deficit that they're having that is probably playing out as a problem that needs to be addressed, not just in terms, all I'm trying to say is that the solution is not just sexual education for the husband, but it's also relational skills. Right. That's what I'm trying to say.
What would you say is, the thing you're most excited about, or the thing about Ray of Hope, or about these groups? How do you see this growing? What's the goal, and what are you most excited about?
That's all you.
I mean, literally, if you take a look at where we are right now, in terms of the amount of groups that we have, the amount of facilitators that we have hired, the amount of members that have called, and then you call us again in 2 months from now, that number will have changed significantly across the board. So that's really exciting. It's really tiring. Everybody that's working at Ray of Hope is working really hard, and it's a beautiful thing. It's people are hearing from friends, which is, aside from Rabbanim and Kala teachers and therapists, they're hearing from friends that there's a place to go and there's support. There's an opportunity to be seen and to be supported. So we should continue to have hard work. We should continue to be flooded. We're here. We want to help. We want to support.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what we spoke about before we walked in the room, just the person behind all this. So Psy.D started the organization. She's the founder, and I think she's the reason many of us joined. Most of us had full practices and didn't necessarily have the time or the deep desire to get on, a Zoom or get into a room late at night sometimes, or just midday with a group member. But Psy.D is highly passionate about the cause and extremely persuasive, and has gotten us really all involved in something that I think every one of us feels incredibly honored to be a part of. I've certainly grown tremendously from the group, from the organization as a whole. I just feel like I've learned a lot as a clinician, a lot as an individual, and I think anyone who's been a part of the organization on any level, on an administrative level, on a facilitator level, on a group member level, it's an incredible experience. So I'm grateful to Psy.D and to the organization, of course, and to all of you for giving us a platform.
Yeah, it's a real labor of love.
Yeah.
And care. Deep care.
Thank you for joining our podcast, and we, commend you on your work and the efforts that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this week's episode. They were great, really great conversation. Really, I think hopefully helpful for unfortunately those that need to hear this. But I think it's so important for everyone to hear conversations like these. And that's what we're trying to do here, just break those taboos. And fun fact, I don't know if you realized that David Kohn was in Kosher Money, in one of our Kosher Money episodes. Maybe comment below on YouTube if you recognize which episode he was in. And if you aren't sure where you could get help from, go ahead and call our friends at Relief. That's 718-431-9501. They could connect you. They connect you with Ray of Hope. They connect you with any challenges that you might be going through in your life. If you got this far in YouTube, leave down the comment powerful. We want to see those words powerful so we know that you watched to the very, very end. Thank you so much for watching, listening to the very end. Go ahead and share this with whoever. Rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Rate us 5 stars on Spotify. And we have an incredible topic coming up next month on That's an Issue. Living L'Chaim.